Okay, sorry about that. I lost track of time and got cut off right in the middle of this slide. So let me just pick up where we left off and take us home here. The failure of federal enforcement is the title of this slide. As I mentioned earlier, there was a KKK Act in 1871 that was struck down by a Supreme Court case. And so the Klan becomes known as the invisible empire of the South for obvious reasons. Not only were they hidden in secret, but also they are really the dictating force behind Southern social order in the South. Many of these Klansmen are also former Confederates who still believe very much so in the lost cause. So even though they lose the Civil War, this is the way that I think they feel that they can redeem their lost cause. And speaking of redeemers, some of them were known as redeemers, and these were made up of pre-war Democrats and Union Whigs. So redeemers, just remember, they're the ones who want to redeem not the civil rights of African Americans, but of whites' rights. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 is also passed in order to try to ensure the rights of African Americans. You can see that Congress did a huge amount of legislation, or passed a huge amount of legislation in a very short period of time. The Civil Rights Act of 1866, the KKK Act of 1871, the Congressional Reconstruction Act of 1867, the Freedmen's Bureau, and then here the Civil Rights Act of 1875. This federal legislation made it a crime for any individual to deny full and equal use of public places and prohibited discrimination in jury selection. Its shortcoming was that it really lacked a strong enforcement mechanism. There was nobody really to enforce this, especially with the Supreme Court cases that kept reiterating the power of the states. And so because of this, these circumstances, the Civil Rights Act of 1875 is largely unenforced and doesn't make a very big impact at all on protecting the rights of African Americans. And you won't see any African Americans in juries or after 1896 with Plessy versus Ferguson, with the implementation of Jim Crow. And as you well know, you won't have any new real civil rights acts for another up to 90 years before you get to the civil rights movement, which has the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So now we're coming to the end of Reconstruction. We've gotten through the Grant presidency, we've gotten through a major depression, we've gotten through the push and shove of the South versus the North and the states versus the federal government. And this is where we're going to see a lot of what the Congress and the radical Republicans, their agenda, what they had implemented, we see it just sort of wither away. Concern begins to shift more to westward expansion. For example, the Homestead Act of 1862, some of the implications there. Also with dealing once again with Native Americans. They moved them west in the 1830s, as we know, and now you're going to see in the 1870s and 80s they want even more of their land, and they want to pursue an assimilationist policy where they're going to try to make Native Americans into good little Americans. And there are also some key monetary issues. As you well know, right now there are a lot of things going on in the United States, but what's the one thing everybody wants to talk about? And that's the economy. So in cases where the economy is bad, many times that becomes the major issue above all. So as we near the 1876 presidential election, we have Rutherford B Hayes and Samuel Tilden. And Rutherford B Hayes was a presidential candidate who believed that it was time to end Reconstruction. And so although he is with the Republican Party, he believes very differently than Congress. And I think for the most part, the common American citizens also were ready for some resolution here, despite the fact that the South clearly was having trouble fitting back into the Union and recognizing a new set of citizens within Southern society. So when you get to the election of 1876, you can see that it is split right down the middle. And the electoral votes are 185 to 184, 50% each. And the electoral votes are also extremely close, less than 200,000 separating the two. So what happens then in this what's known in many circles as the corrupt bargain part 2 is you see that Rutherford B Hayes makes a deal. And so he goes to a lot of the southern congressmen and he says, you know, I know you don't like me best, I know you'd rather have a Democrat, and I know you'd rather have Tilden, but if you elect me and you'll go ahead and throw your support behind me, then I promise that I will end Reconstruction. And so he does this and prevails by signing, shortly after he's inaugurated, he signs the Compromise of 1877. And the Compromise of 1877 restores Southern autonomy and removes martial law. And it's a very abrupt, if it seems like an abrupt end to Reconstruction, it's because it is. Reconstruction probably should have been something that was scaled down or phased out, but rather it just in 1877 ends. And so from 1877 to 1896 you have, as I mentioned, a lot of push and pull with the North and the South and the federal government and state governments, and a lot of it revolving around race relations and the role of African Americans. But by 1896, that's what's going to seal the deal with Plessy versus Ferguson, which is once again going to redefine equality in the United States by ruling that it's okay as long as things are separate but equal, and that's going to involve a case with a African American named Homer Plessy, who is in a white railroad car, even though he is only 1/8 black, or it actually might be 1/16, and was removed to the black car, and so he ruled, you know, that was discrimination. And so this establishes not only separate but equal, but also the one drop rule. And this is going to, between the South reaffirming its own autonomy and politicians refocusing their efforts on the economy and the West, this issue is going to not go away, but it is not going to be something dealt with by the U.S. Congress for 8 to 9 decades. It's really not going to be until World War II where you have black veterans who come home and just finally, you know, cross their arms and say, we're not going to fight and die for our country and also be denied basic rights here at home. So that's the end of Reconstruction. If you want to look at some questions that deal with the larger points, read through these questions. And also don't forget the first 4 questions that were at the very beginning of the PowerPoint, and be able to discuss some of the issues raised by those questions with some of the information in this chapter and on this PowerPoint. All right, see ya.